Mummy, why are your hands so nice and white?
Because Mums has got an F from it. Betty!
Why be bothered with all those boring little tasks around the house? Why not think Afromatic? Efficient, economical and easy to use. The Afromatic is a real labour saver. Indoors or out, there's no better way to get the job done than to invest in any one of the wide range available. They're simple. Afromatics made in South Africa.
We left South Africa because we didn't agree with the politics of the country and the government presently in power. We met at university and formed a band, and we all knew that once we'd finished our university education, we'd have to go into the army and fight for the South African Defence Force, which is actually just supporting the apartheid regime. It's a beautiful country and a lovely place to live, and we all feel sad, but I think we all agree that there's no way that we could ever go back there and live that way of life as it is now, unless things change radically.
Amongst the innocent, an image painted black and white, black and white. Turn around, 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 turn around.
At a pretty early age, I did start questioning it, but I always felt very isolated because I never actually came into contact with people who thought the same way I did. And the only people I knew of who thought that apartheid was wrong and that it was unjust were people who were banned and detained and belonged to the ANC and were considered communists and agitators and things like that. So in a way, I felt as if I was actually one of them. And I think for somebody of, say, 13, 14, to actually think that they might be, you know, an enemy of the state or whatever, it's quite a traumatic thing, really.
I remember my father saying one day that he could quite easily be, somebody could come to the front door, i.e. the security police, could come to the front door, take him away without actually arresting him, and without telling anybody, and he could just disappear. I think to an 8-year-old, that is, the fact that your father's disappearing for whatever reason makes a pretty strong impression on you.
When you start going to school, you tend to mix only with white children and white grown-ups. You do talk about apartheid, but not in the younger years at school. That tends to happen when you get older and start actually thinking about those things.
Indoctrination starts while you're still very young. This extraordinary book claims there were no black peoples at all in South Africa before the first white settlers arrived from Europe. Apparently, as they colonized this remarkably uninhabited land, they ran up against wandering black tribes coming down from the north. A likely story.
Another educational must for the white South African boy is the cadet force. Every week, officers from the South African Army came to our school to prepare us for the 2 years compulsory national service, which all white South African men have to do after leaving school or university. I already knew I didn't want to be in their rotten army, so I had a great time messing up the parades and generally mucking about. It didn't go down too well. They probably marked me down as a commie agitator.
All three of us lived in Pietermaritzburg, which is a medium-sized town in Natal. We all went to university there.
Really, university was the first time you actually got a chance to think about what was right and what was wrong in terms of the way things had happened. And we got to do, well, I did a geography project, which it was very informative for me. And although it was entitled Map Reading and Landscape, it was about the town that we all come from and the way it was divided up according to the color of your skin. And it becomes much more graphical when you have to actually look at it very carefully, and you see, what actually is really happening in the country as a whole, but it's right in your town, and you just had never noticed it before.
1980, there were some riots all over the country against the apartheid education, and Dave and I were walking down, doing this geography project in Maritzburg, walking down the street and happened to get mixed up in one of these, well, it was a peaceful demonstration at that stage. And the police arrived with batons and baton charged. And Dave and I came across this bloke with a, obviously very badly injured. He had a broken jaw and there was a lot of blood. And he was obviously very badly injured. And we went to help him. And as we were bending down to see what was wrong and helping him, 2 white plainclothes policemen came up to us and said, sort of, what the hell are you doing? Helping this chap, sort of, get the hell out of here. Which we did, obviously, because they might have forced us to get out of there if we hadn't done it ourselves.
In the society, it's quite normal to see things like that, and whites tend to just ignore them because it's not part of their society at all. There's a very big thing between the white and black societies, and they are in no way integrated. They just are different. They live in different worlds, as it is.
Most of the whites look upon the blacks as subhuman and regard them almost as one would regard an animal. Basically, they don't give a damn what happens to the blacks. Most whites, anyway. Signs like this still litter the streets of South Africa.
The South African government realizes that it's got a problem having a majority of blacks. So what it wants to do is shift them all out of the country, really. So it's got nowhere to shift them. So it's actually created a whole lot of countries, small countries, to accommodate these people. They take up about 13% of the land of South Africa and are supposed to accommodate 85% of the population. So what they are doing is people born in the center of South Africa, in the middle of South Africa, of a South African town, become citizens not of South Africa but of one of the homelands, according to which tribe he belongs to. So it works out that South Africa is probably the only country in the world eventually that will have no black citizens.
It's not that they have a black problem, that they're actually doing the blacks a favor by providing them with jobs and income for their families. And the truth of the whole thing is that they're actually ripping the whole country off. That every black person who was born in South Africa or anywhere in Southern Africa has a right to be a citizen of that country. And they've just been told that they can't. It doesn't matter. You're a Zulu, so you belong to KwaZulu and you're going to live there. You can come and work in Johannesburg if you like, but don't expect any of the privileges that the white people have.
And now, because they have sort of semi-completed this whole plan, blacks aren't allowed to live inside white areas unless they have a permit or special permission of some sort. They have to be working in that area to be allowed to stay there. And it's not easy to get a permit if you aren't living there. So what happens is over 1,000 people a day are arrested because of not having a pass and being in the wrong area.
Can you imagine that happening here in Bournemouth?
In the back with you. In your guy now.
I went to a party the other night. Guess what? I got into a fight. It's a violent society. It's a violent society. Some guy said I kicked him in the face. He's a disgrace to the human race. You gotta fight somehow. In a violent society. No matter what you do. In a violent society. You'll touch a cloud somehow. In a violent society. And they're after you too. In a violent society. Get a bullet in your back. It could be red, it could be black. Ha ha. I saw a boy of 15. He was shoplifting and he was seen. It's a violent society. It's a violent society. Someone put a bullet in his head. He was living and now he's dead. You gotta fight somehow. In a violent society. No matter what you do. In a violent society. You'll touch a cloud somehow. In a violent society. And they're after you too. In a violent society. Get a bullet in your back. It could be red, it could be black. Ha ha. The other day someone whacked me in the chest. He just didn't like the way I was dressed. It's a violent society. It's a violent society. Animals attack when we see something new. I guess we're just a bunch of animals too. You gotta fight somehow. In a violent society. No matter what you do. In a violent society. You'll touch a cloud somehow. In a violent society. And they're after you too. In a violent society. Get a bullet in your back. It could be red, it could be black. Ha ha.
We'd all wanted to write before, but never got a band together enough to actually use the band for writing. So as soon as we realised that it was falling together, we just started writing as soon as we could and didn't stop.
And our immediate problem at that time was, of course, facing conscription. And so the first few songs we wrote were more or less about the military, and that developed onto more general apartheid and things like that. In 1981, there was some celebrations of the 20th anniversary of the Republic of South Africa. And as an alternative to the official celebrations, a lot of people organised an alternative to the official displays, etc. Part of it was a concert, an anti-republic festival concert. And midway through the concert, some Rhodesians who were living in Pietermaritzburg at the time decided to try and break the concert up and generally started causing fights, trying to just generally disrupt the concert. And as we were about to go on stage, I had an egg thrown at me, and they were just generally trying to cause as much havoc as they could, which disrupted the concert initially, but eventually it all came together and went on.
No, it's interesting. There was an art exhibition upstairs in the Union where the concert was, and there were things happening like one of the sort of right-wing students had vomited over one of the art exhibitions, another one had been urinating all over the place, and things like that. There was just their sort of general attitude towards people who didn't support the government. You know, that their sort of way of combating it was not to sit down and, for example, talk to you about it and find out your views or anything. It was just that you were anti what they believed in, so, I mean, all you were worth was a mouthful of puke, basically. I mean, that's a fantastic mentality.
Well, you can express your views to a certain extent on campus, as long as they only extend as far as the university campus. But as soon as you start getting involved outside the campus, in general society, you are liable to be harassed by the security police in various ways.
The thing is that once you move from that sort of basic just student politics into the real world of politics as such, and start getting actively involved in the government and things like that, and then start opening your mouth and speaking out against things like that, I think that's when you become potentially dangerous to them, and that's when you're liable to, for example, be arrested or be detained.
That's when they try and, once you go out into the community, they start trying to shut you up, and there are various ways in which they can start trying to shut you up. What happens is you get served with a banning order, which lasts for any 5 or 10 years, and you get different categories of banding. The most sort of, what would you say?
Severe.
Yeah, the most severe is house arrest for that entire time, which means you can't leave your house without permission from a magistrate. Not allowed to talk to more than 2 people, and anybody who's banned isn't allowed to be quoted or anything they say published. Even their photographs are not allowed to be published. And then other things that they do is they intimidate you in various ways. They open your post, and so, I mean, you get post that's obviously opened quite often. Both myself and Terence's post was opened. Our telephone was definitely tapped, and often make it quite obvious that they are tapping your telephone, not because they think they can get anything from you, but to keep you quiet. And then, well, they use telephones in all sorts of ways.
Hello, is your husband there, please?
I think, I don't know, personally, I'd say that there are a lot of similarities between Nazi Germany and South Africa. There's the same sort of propaganda, same working on people's emotions. Like, it's all for the fatherland or motherland or whichever it is.
The whites are virtually the Aryan race, I suppose you could say.
They're trying to keep it pure. They don't want to mix it with the black people. You know, there's no such thing as intermarriage between race groups, and that sort of thing. So it's definitely that same sort of syndrome, and the way they enforce their laws also smacks of Nazism. I mean, it's just all coercion. That there's no actual reasoning behind it. It's just some nuts idea, and he's going to force it on 27, 29 million people, whether they like it or not.
The nationalist master plan and the power to operate it stays firmly in white hands, despite the new constitution. All they've done is to create 2 extra houses of parliament, one each for the coloureds and Indians. But since the whites outnumber the 2 of them anyway, and are keeping the all-powerful presidency to themselves, the whole thing would be just a joke if it wasn't for the continued exclusion of the vast majority of the population of South Africa, the black community. You may ask how the whites can do it.
The nationalist government stays in power by maintaining the largest army in Africa, over 400,000 men and a huge stockpile of weapons. Calling it the South African Defence Force is a lousy joke. It's a highly aggressive outfit and often carries out operations into neighbouring countries. Uninvited, of course. For over 10 years, it's illegally occupied Namibia, and at the moment it's got 100,000 men there, basically to subdue the population by terrorising them into submission.
This is a country that can defend itself.
Let go! Let go! Let go! Let go!
These sons of farmers, of professional men, artisans and technicians have left their tractors, desks and machines to man the mechanized power of South Africa's defense force.
To run an army of this size when you've only got 4 million whites, all white males are conscripted for 2 years national service as soon as they've finished school or college, and then annual training camps until they're 65. If you say you're a conscientious objector, you get 6 years in prison. Oh, and of course, after that, you're called up again.
I've got a class photo here. As you can see, that all the chaps in the class are white, and there aren't any blacks. They all were at school with us. It's quite a small class. We got to know them all quite well. Most of these chaps went on to do their army, their national service, as it's called in South Africa. And in fact, one chap, the guy up here, actually was responsible for shooting 3 women while he was in the army, and he was very different to that before he went to the army, so the army did have a lot to do with his attitude towards life.
The official propaganda angle is just a bit smoother than that. The line they take is that our heroic boys on the border are defending free South Africa from a massive communist assault. Of course, what they mean by communist is anyone opposed to apartheid, so all the black opposition falls into that category for a start. The advertisers use the boys on the border to sell everything from biscuits to beer. Somehow there's always a pretty girl meeting a handsome soldier boy. I've never seen one where he's had his arms blown off. He wouldn't be able to drink the beer, I suppose.
Die mense beweeg om die perron op platform 2. Kom, beweeg.
Unfortunately, a lot of young men get taken in and meekly turn up to take part.
Klaar jou kos gehad het en jy het jou bagasie, dan beweeg jy oor en
Half the point of the national service period is that they get you straight from school and pump you full of propaganda. Even the record industry has a go at you.
This is dedicated to our soldiers, our brave young men in uniform. We salute you. We thank you for your courage, for giving up the comforts and safety of your homes, for leaving behind the ones you love for our sake, to protect and guard people like myself you don't even know. We also remember our young men who have fallen while serving our country, and we weep with those who loved them, young heroes who swore an oath when they said, "We shall rise, we shall fall. At your command, this for you, South Africa."
It seems hard to believe, but this charming up-tempo little number was top of the South African hit parade for a while. Somehow that sort of propaganda failed to convince us, and we knew long before the call-up papers came that none of us was going to fight to support apartheid. The only hard part of our decision was leaving our families and the people we loved. One thing's for sure, we can't go back.
Well, I think in the case of myself and Philip, we were both lucky because both our parents are British, so we had British passports, and the 3 of us had spoken a bit and sort of had a loose arrangement that if we could, we'd like to get the band together again, wherever we landed up. And also the other thing is, of course, language. I mean, it's English, the same as we spoke at home.
Well, when I first arrived in Britain, I lived in London for 18 months, and I came down to Bournemouth one weekend, just by pure chance with a friend at the beginning of the summer. And it reminded me a lot of home, with the beach, and the weather was quite warm at the time. And I decided virtually on the spur of the moment to come down and live here. A few weeks after I arrived in Britain, I applied for political asylum, which was granted a few months later on the grounds that if I went home, I'd be persecuted because of my political beliefs. And I went through an organisation in London called the Committee on South African War Resistance, who helps South African war resistors who arrive in Britain without knowing what to do.
So you've got to start from scratch, a place to live, and one of the first things you do is how you're going to support yourself. And we all looked around for jobs, but you know, with 4 million unemployed in Britain, it's not that easy to get jobs. None of us are particularly qualified in anything, so we just settled for hard labour.
Wait, okay, come on. Hang on, mate. Come on, okay.
I think that part of the reason we got the band together is to educate people in Britain who are generally very ignorant about South Africa. And part of the reason we've got the band together, apart from enjoying the music, is to tell people about South Africa. And I think there's a lot of people here that need telling.
Since before South Africa became an independent republic, the United Nations General Assembly has been trying to get sanctions imposed against South Africa. Throughout the duration of this, the United Nations Security Council has actually vetoed that. And the reason for that is that the Security Council consists of the superpowers, the Western superpowers, one of which, for example, is Britain. And Britain is a major trading party with South Africa. And the result of all of that is that British shops are full of South African goods. There are 4 times as many companies in South Africa which have parent companies in Britain than any other country in the rest of the world. I mean, that's a very big amount of money, for example, invested in the country. And all of it is helping to support apartheid and ensuring that the black people are suppressed. Every time you buy something South African, you're helping to support apartheid. So don't buy any South African goods. Any links between South Africa and the West are seen as a justification of the system of apartheid. For example, the recent West Indian cricket tour to South Africa was used by the government to justify the oppression of the people. So don't play any sport in South Africa, don't go on any holidays, and don't go and work there. And if you're in a band, don't go and entertain there, because if you do, you're only making a bad situation worse.
Walk in the front door, see the writing on the wall. I want to say I hate you, but I can't. I can't time it out. Paradox, I'm looking in the mirror now. Paradox, I'm looking in the mirror now. Paradox, I'm looking in the mirror, 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 mirror. Look in the mirror, it's not me looking back at you. I want to say I want you, but I can't. I can't time it out. Paradox, I'm looking in the mirror now. Paradox, I'm looking in the mirror now. Paradox, I'm looking in the mirror, 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 mirror. Lying in the bed with you is something that I shouldn't